get it. There's a huge component to needing to trust yourself on this sacred path. But then there also comes a point where you got to borrow other people's trust in you. Yes, there is a high level of self-responsibility because we can't rely on other people to fix, change, or rescue us. The ways that plants rely on one another to thrive. We get to exchange each other's nutrients with one another whenever one of us is feeling weak. If one of us has a surplus to give, like, I want to be that tree.
Put up your mask, let down your guard, and let's talk about the real. This is the Bring Your Own Mask podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the BYOM podcast. I'm so excited to share with you a conversation that I had with a guest of mine named June, also known as June Kaewsith, a professional artist. She's a wellness consultant as well as a storytelling coach. Now, one of the most interesting things about June is the fact that she studied under a midwife in Thailand. And that's actually when she learned more about her ancestors. And during that time, she realized that all of our ancestors were actually entrepreneurial. So if you're wondering, well, like, how is that so? I really encourage you to listen to this episode because it is absolutely gold. So now June facilitates private coaching for her clients, especially for women who are people of color and that are seeking to find clarity in their message and their confidence in speaking out to their audience so that they can really grow their business from a place of alignment. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, June.
So you're actually my first person I'm interviewing after getting married. So
Oh, when did you get married?
2 weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations. I thought you were already married. Awesome.
Yeah, I know. I
That's
give off that vibe. People always think that I'm already married. I'm like, no, I wasn't until 2 weeks ago.
Like, I was a sweats, no makeup girl who could fart and burp in front of her partner well before we were married. That's when you already know. I just officiated my first wedding.
Oh my gosh. No way. When?
Like 2 weeks ago, November 11th.
Okay, that was like a few days before mine. Wow, where?
Here in Orange County. And I was so proud of the speech that I put together. And it was an unplugged ceremony. So nobody was allowed to record other than the videographer. I will say what was inspiring about the wedding was that so many things from the inside went wrong, like a lot. But they were just like so cool throughout. Like, they did so much to try to save money. They made most of the decorations themselves. The groom, he taught himself how to put together a photo booth, and it was really cute.
Wow.
But then on the day of the wedding, it didn't work.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Bride forgot her veil coming out because that morning she lost half her vows. It like disappeared from her computer and she went to go print it out. She's like, where are my vows?
Yeah.
But all of that to say, the relationship is already solid and they genuinely put together the wedding just for their family and friends.
Yes.
So she was the chillest bride that you will ever have met. Any other bride would have freaked the fuck out and had a breakdown. And she just like,
Right. You know what? It's so similar to our wedding too, where we have like such a solid relationship even before the wedding that I almost feel like all of the drama that we had, and 100%, we also had those internal conflicts and it manifested into external conflicts, but I almost feel like they were all like not us, but everyone around us. I want your viewpoint on this because obviously you work with a lot of ancestral work. I almost feel like a wedding or a marriage brings up a lot of ancestral stuff.
When I looked at this wedding, I'm like, you know that you're facilitating a seance, right?
It is. It really is. If you're not mindful of it, you're not going to realize the gift that it brings. But 100%, I definitely feel like a lot of it was just ancestral stuff, just rising to the top. And we were able to really clearly see it that day.
Wow. What kind of stuff?
Essentially, there was a lot of family drama, right? And so I feel like it was on both sides. It wasn't just us. And we're two different cultures. Like I'm, Chinese descent, he's Armenian. And so it's almost as if it was like polar opposites merging together.
Wow.
It was just so much like, and then it just kind of like blossomed in a way in our marriage. And like, I would say the beginning part of our wedding was like a lot of tension. And then right when the ceremony, we also had an amazing officiant. During that moment, it was like everything broke open and then I could feel the love. We were, obviously married here in Sedona. I'm actually in Sedona right now.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was surrounded by my ancestors, the Red Rocks, and I'm just like, wow, there's just like this feeling I can't even explain. And then everything was fine again. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like those moments are really meant to test your faith. And so, what I learned just by observing my best friend and her partnership and all the things that could be perceived as gone terribly wrong was just learning from how they reacted as a couple.
Yeah.
And that for me was like, y'all are solid. Because at the end of the day, this thing is going to be petty in comparison to your life together. So
Right.
can you remain grounded? They've hiked summits together and have nearly died. In my wedding speech, I talked about how they have already lived many honeymoons that many of us dream of. If you see her travel pictures, it's like, I want to go there. I want to be there. But then when you hear the stories of what it took for them to capture certain images and the ways they almost died or froze to death, gotten lost with no Wi-Fi in another country where they don't speak the language and only the food on their backs.
Wow.
Like, okay, maybe I'm not ready to actually go through those lengths to get the memories and the photos that you have.
Yeah.
So this wedding is just like, okay, we already have solidified we're doing this. This celebration is for everybody else. How are you going to receive this?
Yeah. And I feel like most of the time, things like this is for everyone else. Actually, you know what? This really segues into the podcast. So for those that are listening, when we put on the face mask, it basically represents the mask that we wear, what we want to show society. And then when we take it off, essentially, it's kind of like who we are at our core. So why don't we just go right in? Let's put on our mask. Let's put it on because I want to talk about the mask that you have on, June. Like, again, everyone wears masks. There's nothing to be embarrassed about it. Obviously you have an amazing bio, right? Like you've done a lot of stuff in your lifetime. So share with us kind of like, what is the mask that you feel like you're putting on right now to the world?
Ooh, what many people may see is somebody who carries so much confidence and completely has her shit together. But what they don't know is that I still experience levels of anxiety and so much fear on this journey of sacred entrepreneurship.
Here's the thing, right? We all know you as someone that is so confident, right? Not only are you a professional artist, you're a wellness consultant, you wear many hats, you're also a storytelling coach. And I know that you spent a lot of your 20s doing community organization work, nonprofit work, and you've really done so much great work into this community. You have really integrated what you have learned. And in a way, people see you a certain way. And so I really want to talk about like, where does that anxiety come from? Like, why do you still feel like you still have that?
Yeah. And I want to be very cautious about putting certain labels to my feelings. And this is something that I coach my own students on whenever they're sharing their story and they're talking about how there was a time in their life where they had depression, where they had so much anxiety. And I'm like, okay, I've never personally been diagnosed with those things as an Asian American, as a child of immigrants. Therapy is not something that was promoted. It's like, why are you going to put your business out there? However, I know what it's like to not want to get out of bed because you're questioning your existence. I know what it's like to just feel your heart beating so fast, your throat closing, your gut contracted and constipated that society labels it as anxiety or as fear. I can relate to what comes up physiologically in the body.
Right.
And oftentimes I feel that we can run the excuse of using those feelings, those uncomfortable emotions that come up as a way to not take aligned action. I experience this all the time. Oh, it's because of my anxiety. And then it's like, well, but what would happen if you actually started the thing? So, what if instead what we label as anxiety or even fear or maybe even depression as a symptom of you not taking any action at all? Because
Mm,
I know the moment that I began taking aligned action, and sometimes I'm not even certain if that's aligned. It's
yeah.
just, I'm afraid. I have no idea what the outcome is going to be. And if the body doesn't know the difference between what is fear and what is excitement, how is it that I can tell myself a new story about this experience and be in the realm of play over perfectionism?
Mm,
Because we're so fearful of getting things wrong. We're so afraid of fucking up versus seeing fuck up as feedback.
yes, absolutely. 100%. I love that you say that because it's so true, right? Fear and excitement is literally the same thing in a sense, right? We sometimes label it in a way wrong too. Sometimes we can be really fearful, but what it is that we're actually really excited. And I feel like sometimes that stops people obviously from moving forward and really doing the
Mhm.
things that they want to do in their life or becoming that person. So, what would you say is something that you personally have done to kind of break through those moments?
Well, I may be biased in saying this, but one, I've gotten a coach. I've
Yeah.
gotten several coaches, and I've been seeing these posts about self trust. You need to trust yourself. And I get it. There's a huge component to needing to trust yourself on this sacred path. But then there also comes a point where you got to borrow other people's trust in you. And
Mm,
so I personally feel like you can do the affirmations.
yeah.
You can read all the books, you can do all the mantras, you can sit on your cushion all you want. And yes, there is a high level of self responsibility because we can't rely on other people to fix, change, or rescue us.
Sure.
That can't happen, right? However, I find my greatest teachers exist not in books, not in individual, but in Mother Nature. The
Mhm.
ways that plants rely on one another to thrive.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the mycelium network, right? We get to exchange each other's nutrients with one another whenever one of us is feeling weak. If one of us has a surplus to give, like, I want to be that tree. I want to be the one with a system that's so rooted, so grounded that all of these other plants that are still in the process of sprouting and of blooming can link arms with me, can link roots with me. And then when shit tries to blows us down, this happened in Hurricane Katrina, right? The
Yeah.
oak trees. And I love how in many indigenous cultures, trees are seen as people. We
Mm,
treat them as such with so much respect and reverence. But when the hurricane hit Katrina, the only thing that was standing was the oak tree because of the ways that they were rooted together underneath the soil.
I love that. I love that so much because now that I'm in Sedona and I'm obviously much more connected to nature than I am in the city, I definitely see that. And I feel like most people don't value that, right? They don't value Mother Nature as much as we should. And I love that you say that the roots are hidden underground. And like the reason why they were standing up is because underneath everything, they're so interconnected. And in society, we're so focused on external things. I feel like what you see on Instagram is what you believe, right? You don't see all those hidden things that make up that person or all the trials and the tribulations that they've been through. And I really want to talk about that for you too, because I know you've been through a lot in your life. What is one thing in your life that you feel like has really shaped you to become the person you are today?
It's so easy for us to want to go immediately to a traumatic experience. And I feel like that's not really my story, at least not anymore. It's just a chapter, it's something that I experienced. And
Yeah.
so there's obviously so many moments, but I'm going to reflect on an experience I actually had last year in the height of the pandemic, where I was in the midst of launching a new program and I was probably like $20,000 in debt because I just made some big investments and I was uncertain about whether or not I would make that back. Like maybe I should just quit. Now, who am I to do any of this stuff? Who would want to work with me? You know, like we're in a pandemic and there's this collective frequency of fear and of grief. And
Yeah.
I was channeling all of that into, okay, I gotta hustle and show up more. And then I had a friend who called me from another friend's house. She's a witch, literally, she's a full-time witch. And they
Yeah.
called me to come and hang out with them for 2, 3 days. I'm like, I can't, you know, I have to work. And then they're just like, you can work from here. There's Wi-Fi. It's a small town called Julian. I was like, what is this? And so it's one of those old, creepy towns where it's like, you know, older, white, retired people. And I got there at around 10 p.m. and it literally felt like I was driving through the scene of Get Out. I'm like, I'm going to get kidnapped. They're going to take my brain and stick it in a white person's body. And I'm thinking like, why does she live out here? And I'm thinking we're going to be in a cabin. I had a lantern in my trunk just in case, but I show up finally. I'm terrified because of the journey it took for me to get there. And the house ends up being one of the most beautiful homes I've ever been in, like with circular doors. When she opened it, like she doesn't even have a dog. She owns a wolf. Okay.
Oh my God.
This is my friend Reverend Brianna Lynn, and this dog has like a moon drawn on their forehead. Luna is the cutest thing ever. And when I walked into the home, you could see large windows that reveal hundreds of acres of trees and a sliver of the ocean. I just remember being like, you did this? You don't even have that many Instagram followers. She's like, yeah, like I'm a $250,000 witch. What can I say?
Right.
Like, I don't need that. And it was just a pivotal moment for me to recognize that, oh, this is possible. And she is also white bodied. Her commitment is that whatever revenue she makes, a large percentage of that goes back to the indigenous people of that land. And that's her form of reparations. But the actual pivotal moment was I didn't open up my laptop at all in those 3 days.
Yeah.
Like I just couldn't. I just
How
dropped
can
in
you? Yeah. You're like in this.
I know. I'm like, I don't
portal.
want to work. And I was planning on catching up with all of these books and I didn't read any of them. And instead, my friends and I just did a little psilocybin journey. And I don't indulge very often, but when I do, it's always just profound lessons and deep, deep medicine for me. And so I want to be clear with anybody who's listening and is like, oh, I want to try like mushrooms or whatever. It's like, I feel like you have to spiritually and energetically prepare for these experiences. And the people that you are with, as well as your environment and your mindset, are going to completely shift the experience. And so while my other friend was having like a very terrible trip, like a lot of her childhood traumas was coming up, I was just like, whoa, all of the anxiety that I showed up with just dissipated. And I heard a voice from my ancestors. They whispered, it's like I'm sitting there amongst the trees. And they said, there's no more healing. Why do you tell yourself this story that you're healing for us? We're good. We've moved on. You have an opportunity to be in joy.
Okay, hang on for 1 second. I really have to take that in for a second because I feel like there's such a misconception around healing, right? Like thinking that we need to heal for our ancestral line or we need to heal for them or for other people or whatnot. But really, it's so profound because when we're healing, it's for ourselves, right? It's for nobody else except ourselves. And there comes a point where we can be done with healing in a sense, right? Like we can really just step into living and being in so much joy, like you mentioned. And people forget that. And sometimes people get lost into this idea of like, oh, I'm going to continue healing for the rest of my life. It's for my children. And obviously, like, it's good to heal so that your children don't experience the same things. But at the same time, like, when are you going to start living in joy, like you said?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I feel like there's too many of us that are equating healing with suffering and with pain. And healing can be an incredibly pleasurable experience.
Yeah.
I find so much joy when I'm in dance class. And I also feel like I'm healing when I allow myself to grieve and to purge.
Yeah.
And healing is not an end process,
Right.
right? There is no real destination. I can't go to one yoga class and suddenly be like, okay, now I have a banging body. No, it takes practice. It takes
Yes.
consistency.
Right. 100%. I think that's the one thing that I've definitely learned this year in particular is that, for instance, right, like this whole year, we spent the entire year planning for this wedding, right? This marriage for other people, essentially, obviously for us too. But I realized it was like I was planning, I was also training my body for an entire year.
Mhm.
And then like that day happens. And then it's kind of like, oh, wow, I just spent all this time like doing
Mhm.
this for this one
Mhm.
moment. And then I
Yeah.
had to really quickly ask myself, like, am I doing this for just this? Or am I going to be
Yeah.
doing this forever? That moment of practice is going to continue. And that's when we can really soak it in and be like, this is joy, right? This is self mastery.
Yeah. And your body is actually getting stronger, not when you're working out, but when you are resting. So
Mhm.
it's a balance, right? If we're not taking breaks between us doing these high intensity workouts, then our bodies don't have time to recover. And so I love how I'm doing this podcast interview and I have this face mask on because right before you press record, I'm like touching my cheeks. I'm like, oh, that's a new dry patch. I really got to make time to do a face mask. Thank goodness that Kristen is having us there for ourselves while we're swapping
Talking.
stories.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of face masks, I was going to say yours looks like it's kind of like coming off now. I think it's time for you to,
Yeah, I don't
what do you
want to.
think? What do you
It
think?
feels so good.
So while we're taking this off, I want you to tell all of us, what are you letting go of and what are you stepping into today after you take off your mask?
Honestly, the first thing that came to mind is, oh my God, I'm going to the DMV today. It's like, oh, the human before the healer, the human who still has to go and deal with her license and to registration and laundry and seeing even those mundane acts as ritual, as a ceremony, as an opportunity to bring joy into spaces that otherwise lack so much of it. It doesn't have to be complicated, right? I get an opportunity today to spread even more joy with any life that I come across, even if it's the person at the DMV.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I feel like sometimes we get into this mindset that if we're not changing the world, like whether that's with our clients or like doing some kind of retreat, that we're not doing anything. Like you said, the mundane things like going to the DMV or doing your laundry. Like, how can we make that more of a ritual? People don't see it that way. They just see it as like mundane things. You know what I'm saying?
Whenever monks are preparing for monkhood, sometimes in certain lineages, before they're able to receive the teachings, they have to learn how to see cleaning their home as prayer,
Mm,
as a ritual, scrubbing the toilets, learning how to cook and prepare food, and to make sure the kitchen is in order, because
yeah.
all of these things they compound into us not seeing as the meditation or these spiritual practices as the solution, but as a way to integrate it into our life to where then it becomes an embodiment. That's why
Right.
I was saying I'm really proud of the sanctuary that I've created for myself, because I noticed that when things are not in order, I don't feel in order. Like the
Yeah.
real revolution begins right here in our living space.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's the thing. The first thought that I could think of when people are listening to this are like, well, I'm not a monk. Like, how do I make this into a
Yeah, I'm not
ritual?
either.
Right?
I mean, like, I got my head shaved.
Yeah. I was gonna say that. You're one step closer.
I am one step closer, and I have many, many, many guilty pleasures. You don't have to be a monk, but what you can be is a kinder person. What you can be is somebody who still chooses love over conflict, or seeing conflict as an opportunity to deepen our capacity to love and to
Yeah.
forgive.
Yeah, 100%. It's very simple. I think sometimes because it's so simple, people make it harder than it actually can be, because I think we've been programmed all of our lives to have to suffer, right? We talked about that earlier in the podcast. Like we've kind of moved into the space where we don't have to anymore. And why do we keep doing this to ourselves? Why do we keep torturing ourselves? Why? Why do we do this?
Because our bodies are addicted to the suffering.
Mm,
And at least for myself as a child of immigrants, I rarely saw my parents take sacred pauses. There's always a guilt that comes with slowing down. And it makes sense. It's like when my mom tells me about her birth experience, she's like, I didn't have time to experience postpartum depression because I had to work. I had to go right back to work. And so I feel like that conditioning has been passed down to me and to maybe many of us, to where there's this fear, if I take a pause, take a sacred rest,
Yeah.
then things are going to fall apart around me. And so you and I, choosing the paths that we're walking on, have an opportunity to shift that narrative and to embody it. And then what becomes a byproduct of that is others who are also tired of choosing the narratives that maybe have been passed down to them from their parents or their grandparents, and say, you know what, it stops here. I get to embody what a different story can look like for myself, my younger self, and the next generation.
Yeah, actually, this leads me to a really great question for you, because I know that you're someone that's so deep into ancestral work. And I'm literally looking at your 12-week coaching accelerator called Roots to Rise. And, we talk about how we don't have to do what our parents did, what our ancestors did, right? Like that time has passed and now we're kind of entering into this new paradigm. But I want to ask you, like, when should we actually connect with our ancestors and be rooted in those traditions, those cultures, those beliefs? And then when do we know when to let that go? Because there is a fine difference. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what you would say to that.
Well, I know that my great grandfather had several wives, but it was normal back then. And everybody has their own sexual preferences and their practices. But I mean, like, I can't do the polyamory thing just because it's like one person at a time to love deeply. I don't want to have to deal with multiple personalities. Self-care is a full-time job. Okay.
Right.
So we all share space with like one other person to let into my world when the door is open. But that's just like one example. And I grew up at a Buddhist temple. So whenever I hear some of these Buddhist chants, it's nostalgic for me. It's like singing a song. I don't know what they mean exactly, but I know that it feels good when I share it. And a couple weeks ago, I put together a gathering with a couple other Thai American friends. Apparently, I'm pronouncing this wrong, according to my other Thai friend, Loy Kratong. I almost feel like all of our holidays are like a Day of the Dead, but it's when we honor the water goddesses and we create these boats out of banana leaves and offer it to the water spirits.
Okay.
And,
Yeah. I've done that.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, we used styrofoam and I tied a string onto the boats. And so it was more symbolic when we released it. And they're like, okay, we're going to pull it back in now. I never got to experience that in the motherland. When I see pictures of it, I'm like, oh, I want to be there one day. And I'm like, oh, when am I going to be able to go back? And how is it that I can begin creating those experiences now, even if I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing?
Yeah.
My friends came over and they're like, okay, so are you going to give us a tutorial? I was like, here's the tutorial. Texted them the YouTube link of how to make the boat themselves. I'm like, we're going to learn how to reclaim this together. Next year when we do it, y'all have figured it out with me, and then we can show others how to do it. And I have to say, when our elders heard that we were doing this, including my mother, they laughed because they're like, oh, that's cute. But for everybody who participated, it was emotional for us. So my mom stops by and she starts singing the traditional Loy Krathong song. And then she just starts dancing. She's like, yeah, this is what I used to do as a child whenever we would release these boats. And it was just one of the cutest moments ever to see her relive a little glimpse of her childhood. And now she says to me, I didn't realize how the things that I grew up with would be so important to you. The fact that I went to Thailand to study with an indigenous Thai midwife, and all of my classmates were white, by the way. So it just felt weird to go back and try to reclaim this practice. I'm like, okay, well, like these white folks are taking my ancestral practices, right? And going back to their countries, charging a buttload of money for it. They get to label themselves as Thai traditional healers.
Right.
And that was another test for me where it's like, wow, my anger is being misdirected. While my own people who are actual traditionalists are barely getting paid for what it is they do. Like people go to Thailand to get massages and they are healers as well. This is deep, profound healing work that has been passed down from thousands and thousands of years. And so I find out that when I come back to the States, that my mother's grandmother was a midwife, and that as a child, my mom would follow her around, assisting her. Just imagine a little like 10-year-old witnessing babies coming into this world, but it wasn't in a hospital. It would be in their homes, surrounded by family with at least 40 days to rest afterward.
Yeah. And I agree with you, because speaking of that, I actually was talking to my husband about this, because obviously our next phase in our life is, having children. And like, obviously it's not happening at this moment, but I'm actually really considering a home birth. And I just feel much more empowered that way. And I feel in a way that it would really connect me to my ancestors. And I'm honestly kind of terrified, but also excited at the very same time. So thank you for sharing that, because I feel that's where my path is right now. So
what I would encourage you to do is to get a doula, because if complications arise during home birth, that the hospital is at least there as an additional resource, but having a doula to advocate for you. And so when I came back from Thailand, I thought I was going to be a doula. And I did one or two births, first experience.
Gosh, you did. Okay.
So, yeah. It was like such a beautiful, profound experience seeing a reincarnated ancestor return back to this physical realm. I'm like, whoa, this is a portal. And then giving the parents time to bond and just like gently slipping out. But I decorated the hospital room with battery operated candles and aromatherapy, and the nurses and doctors loved coming into our rooms. I also was like, oh wow, is this how it works inside of hospitals? It's just like a rotating door, like having to constantly re-explain yourself. Oh, that doctor, that nurse already did that. Oh, actually no, she just ate. Or it's like, whoa, I get why doulas are so important, which is why today a lot of my clients are actually birth workers. They are doulas. Many of them are actually therapists. I'm actually a witch. I want to bring in my tarot. I want to bring in my copal. I want to bring in my incense and my chants and my prayer into these client sessions, but I'm afraid of being burned. I'm afraid of being persecuted. That is the ancestral trauma that's gotten passed down. And also just trauma from academia, which if we look at the roots of where schools even come from, it was in service of the industrial age where we were meant to come out and be another cog in the wheel. And we have an opportunity to redefine that, because that system, that model is already crumbling before our eyes.
Wow.
And that's why I see entrepreneurship as that sacred path of devotion, as our opportunity to reclaim the parts that we want to carry on, or at least to redefine it in a way that feels good for us, not in a way that is appropriating other cultures and traditions, which many of us can run the risk of appropriating our own. But doing it as a way to remember to pay tribute to those that came before us.
For sure. I mean, everything that you just talked about, I feel like I almost have chills, because it's like this deep knowing that I know this, right? And like, because our society didn't really talk about it, at least like, from what I grew up with, hearing you talk about this right now is just so important. I feel like I'm just excited for where the world is going right now. We're heading in that direction where we're bringing up things that have happened in the past. We're honoring our ancestors by doing it now. And so it's just amazing. Honestly, I'm just amazed by how society is heading, both disappointed and amazed at the same time. But
you're not afraid?
I'm afraid too. Trust me. I'm smiling, but deep down, I'm like freaking out, honestly.
Let's just say that we are excited until it becomes true. We can choose either perspective, right?
Yeah. I may have you on a Zoom call while I'm giving birth.
Yeah.
I'm totally kidding.
I will coach your partner into body work for you. I come with the resources. If not me, I will refer one of my students to you. But that's the real vision, right? Is to see a healer, not just on every block, but within every household.
Yeah.
To where it's not like, oh, I'm the healer. Like my family would never consider themselves healers, but they know how to work so closely with plant medicine. And when I say plant medicine, And I'm not just talking about psilocybin or hallucinogens. I'm talking about the basil leaves, the bird's eye chili. Like as a child looking at these plants, everything looks the fucking same to me. It's green. And
Right.
yet here my mom is and my auntie's being like, oh, meet moringa. I'm just like, what? And now I start to see the plant world a little differently when I learn how to identify them.
Yeah.
And I get to learn what medicinal properties they have. Oh, your grandpa, he would eat this leaf all the time. I was like, this bush that's been growing in the front of our house is edible? What?
Speaking of your grandfather and speaking of ancestors, I really would like if you can share with us some kind of like remembrance or like poem that you feel called to share with us. Cause I think that sometimes we tend to forget what our ancestors are here to teach us. I know this is totally like a random question in the middle of us talking about this, but it
Okay.
reminded me when you mentioned grandfather about what can you share with us when it comes to your lineage?
A poem?
Yeah.
I'll share a poem I wrote called Grandmother's Hands. I've been told I have my grandmother's hands, rubbing calendula and rose oil to soothe the crevices forming in my skin. Lately, they've been cracking from the many times I've sang Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or even Happy Birthday to myself, treating every cleanse as a ritual to celebrate old karma being washed away. Beyond flesh, my bones speak to the future I cannot quite grasp yet, but the feeling is certain. We were made for these times. Grandmother's hands knew how to garden a wilting weed back to life, the ones they tried to remove as unwanted, uprooted from her soil, flown into a foreign land as a reminder that sometimes dandelions serve as medicine. With few words spoken, English broken, her whispers from the garden beckon me to speak on the things she wished she could have said before her body turned to stardust and soil. Kin
Mm.
kao riang, have you eaten yet? Hands offering strange fruit, reminiscent of her country to say, I love you. What is blooming from these moments will compost and rebirth into the same balm that soothes these dry grandmother hands today. I'm patiently caring for her, preserving what innocence I have left as I call upon the elder I too am becoming, the one unsilenced, as loud as an oak tree, as resilient as a lotus, with seeds that will carry our stories of a time when the earth asked us to be still, to be rooted, to savor the moments of cleansing, of compost, of creation. What will you do with your hands, with your heart, with your voice? What are the stories you will tell of how you emerged from the mud as you beamed light into the darkness in these times of change?
Oh my goodness. That was amazing. Wow. I was looking over at my dog. Look, he's asleep right now. Let me just take a moment to just process what you just voiced out because I feel like it reminded me so much of my own grandmother. And I felt like she was literally right next to us when you were speaking it. I want to thank you for doing that.
We are our grandmothers, right? Our ancestors are not this entity, this spirit that is outside of us, but live within us with every breath.
Hmm.
So when I cry, I feel them crying. When I'm in joy, I feel them in joy. And so that's what I perceive of when we talk about healing generations before and after us. I'm not healing for my ancestors. No, but as evidence on this journey, I've witnessed the ways that my own relationship with my mother has strengthened because of my spiritual practice. And I also receive it from her because she is an active meditator. And
Mm.
so I know that the work that my mother is doing to cleanse away her karma is so that she doesn't have to be a wandering spirit when she becomes an ancestor. Because Yura and Sedona recently showed her this alien documentary called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. So good. It just came out last year. And you think it's an alien documentary. It's really a documentary about spiritual practice and of meditation. So good on Amazon Prime. And we're all essentially just wanting to find our way back home to the stars, and that what we label as aliens or extraterrestrial beings are actually here to restore divine order, but the media has conditioned us to be fearful of them. And there's like this belief that they are just more evolved versions of us.
Right.
And so when we meditate, it's almost like a glimpse into our future self when we're able to make that connection. And my mom watches this documentary because she meditates with friends. Like, oh yeah, my friends, like they see things, but I don't want to be an alien. Watching this, it will give me ideas, and I am on a mission to not come back at all.
Oh my gosh, my mom has said the same thing. My mom has said the same thing.
You should hang out.
Yes, they should totally hang out. I feel like they would totally get along because my mom said the exact same thing to me during the wedding week when we were here in Sedona. She was like, by the way, I don't want to reincarnate back as a human. Like, I'm done. And I'm like, okay, mom. But speaking of what we just talked about, I want you to share your program, Your Roots to Rise. You also have a Bud to Blossom, right? That begins in January 2022. So can you share with us this program? I wanted to learn more about it. I'm sure everyone here wants to learn.
Sure. So Roots to Rise is my storytelling and legacy accelerator for radical healers, creatives, witches, especially the closeted ones that are still learning how to find clarity in their message and confidence in their speaking so that they can share their story and grow their business and heal generations before and after them. And I see it consistently with the students that come through my container, which have predominantly been women of color and gender nonconforming folks. The first thing we do is that we call in an ancestor to guide us on this journey, because it's so much more than businesses we're building. And I've literally witnessed so many shifts in people's bodies when they learn how to tell their story from a place of empowerment and healing versus victimization and trauma and pain. Like I'm telling you, cysts, fibroids, endometriosis. While I'm not a medical expert, one thing that I have seen consistently is that many of these physiological symptoms in our bodies are just stories that are stagnant, stories that we're holding on to. Sometimes there's stories that are not even of our own that we've taken on. And so when I hear somebody share their story, I can assess where they're at in their own healing journey.
Right.
And so when we work with the stories that we're first telling ourselves and alchemize it, then we can witness our reality shift. So that's my 12-week program for people who are still not even clear on what their sacred offering is. We birth our offerings from our story medicine. And Bud to Blossom is, again, for like witches, creatives, radical healers who already have a service. Maybe you have multiple offerings, like I have my Reiki sessions and I have my mediumship, just like scattered. Wait, why did you choose this path? So that you can have a life of more freedom and liberation and joy. And yet here you are still married to these struggles of wanting to be accessible to everyone, and you're burnt out and you want to burn your business down. Like, let's fix that. Let's fix that. Less is more. And I cannot give you the perfect strategy or the perfect funnel, but what I can do is to uphold you to the highest frequency of love when you go into your doubts and your shadows, because you can make all of the money in the world. But if you are not feeling abundant in your life, then what is any of the money worth? So let's first work on that and allow everything else to be a byproduct of you choosing pleasure, you choosing joy, you choosing a life of abundance, and you seeing healing not as suffering, but as an opportunity to just like spread more love. So I called it a business mastermind, but really I see this as a place to compost any of the beliefs you've been carrying about what your business or your legacy is supposed to look like, and cultivate fertile soil so that you can make sure that this is sustainable for yourself, for the people you work with, for the planet. So those are my two offerings right now. If any of those call to you, then reach out. And I just love it when people reach out, irregardless, to share if any of our stories spoke to you.
Yeah, I'm going to leave all of your links, right, for everyone. So if you feel called to any of these two programs, definitely hit up June, because even like this podcast interview, I just feel like whoever joins your program is going to immensely benefit from it, especially if they're like scattered, right? Especially if they have all these things going on. And even if you're not, right? Like just being in your presence and your container, I know would be life transforming. So thank you again, June, for being on the show. I had so much fun talking about all these like ancestral like things that people don't really talk about in nature and all that stuff. And I just really am so honored and grateful to know you, to talk to you. And I'm sure everyone listening will feel the same. So June, thank you for being such an honored guest. And everyone go follow June. She's amazing.